is the Atari 8-bit podcast.
All of a sudden, one Friday at 6:30, she came through the door with beer and soda pop and lots of snacks and 6 children. Of course, what it did was it shut down the office completely.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Bill Bowman was co-founder and CEO of Spinnaker Software, one of the first software companies that focused exclusively on educational software. He was at the company from its founding in 1982 through 1987. Spinnaker's software lineup included Snooper Troops, Delta Drawing, FaceMaker, Adventure Creator, In Search of the Most Amazing Thing, KinderComp, and many other titles. In early 1984, InfoWorld called Spinnaker the 16th largest software company in the world, with $10 million in 1983 sales. This interview took place on May 16, 2017. So I would like to start before the beginning, if you can set me up, the prehistory to Spinnaker, any education or other things that you did, kind of the run-up to getting there, and I'd like to start there, please.
Sure. Well, I think the run-up was very unexpected. My co-founder, David Cease, and I were both consultants at the Boston Consulting Group in Boston, and I was really getting itchy to get into technology and hoping that BCG would take on some interesting technology clients, and that just didn't happen. So I kind of jumped into a couple of other companies, and at one of them, Bolt, Beranek and Newman, BBN, in Cambridge, was sort of this really high-tech place, and I went in there and wrote a business plan for them getting into educational software. And they looked at it and chose not to do it, which is fine. But I decided then I really wanted to see if I could move into that area, and talked to some venture capitalists. And one of them on the West Coast, a friend of mine, said, "Well, gosh, you should go and see Jeff Chambers at TA Associates in Boston." And went down to see him. He couldn't meet with me, but Jackie Morby came and took me to lunch. I had no idea who she was. And I was just sort of explaining this overall idea. And then she just said, "Well, why don't you and David Cease go and spend 2 weeks just going all over the country and talking with other software publishers, of which there were very few at that time. This is 1982 or 81 even. And retailers and distributors, and just see, this is a brand new business, a brand new market, brand new industry. But that's what you guys are trained for at BCG. So to figure things like that out. So see if you can figure this one out." So we did that, have had some tremendous meetings with a whole bunch of distributors, and basically observed that the rubrics of consumer marketing simply did not appear in this B2C market. And we thought that we really could offer something by bringing sort of the rigors of consumer marketing into this particular business. So we wrote a business plan to that with that goal in mind, and TA decided to go fund it. So we were in business in April of 1982 with, of course, understood at that point in time that Christmas came on December 25th, and that if we wanted to participate in that season, which is when most of the software would be sold, we really needed to be finished with all of our work and have our products on the shipping dock ready to go out to the various software distributors by October 1st. So that was our deadline. Put together a detailed chart that would get us there, and actually made the deadline.
Yeah, I was noticing that in my research. You were founded in April, and then you launched for Christmas. That seems really aggressive.
Sure, but it's really great not to know what you're doing and just to assume that, if you want to be in this business, you actually have to make this deadline. So we didn't know any better, and David went up to Minneapolis, where he found this vendor, this plastic manufacturer that would actually create these very nice-looking clamshell plastic packages that we could actually put the software in. And so he did that, made a big order, they put it all on a truck, shipped it down here, and walked into our office and said, "Hey, we're here with pallets of these clamshell packages. Where do you want us to put them?" And we just had never thought of that. So we didn't have a shipping dock. We didn't have an elevator. And fortunately, David's wife had joined us by then, and she was a pretty, detail-oriented person. So she just ran down, hopped in the truck, and went and rented a warehouse. And so that got us through that little crisis. But anyway, we were able to put together, a good relationship with Tom Snyder, who did some phenomenal work and continues to do phenomenal work. I have no idea how he can stay creative that long. But Snooper Troops 1 and Snooper Troops 2 were among our first products, and we were able to get those put together and debugged and ready to ship, and actually did make the deadline.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah, I mean, and that packaging has really stood up. I mean, today, people collect software, whatever. All the cardboard boxes have a lot of them have
died out.
Crumpled, just gotten squished over time. But man, those plastic clamshells just they're still there.
Probably wouldn't pass an environmental quality award, that's for sure, because you just can't get rid of those things.
Right.
But it really did differentiate us. Most of the educational software was sold in Ziploc bags that were hanging on a little, thing, and they were cassettes and so forth. And certainly with the launch of Atari and cartridges, and as well as Commodore machines and 5 1/4 disk drives, we really had lots of opportunities to put out a number of different formats and a number of different products. I think we had close to 30 different products on the Atari platform. And that was, it was a very exciting time. I mean, being involved in the launch of an industry is just an incredibly exciting opportunity, one that I'm not sure I'd ever get again, probably haven't gotten again. I'm now the dean of a business school, so that's a real different business. And, but boy, that was really a lot of fun. Just a great adventure. Nice. Some of the nicest people, some of the smartest people. We were all discovering how an industry got launched, and we all discovered, returns at the same time. Had never understood that if you ship into the channel that you might have massive returns after the Christmas season's over. And of course, that certainly was something that hurt a lot of us, but it's just part of the business, and we have to go through a cycle at least once before you really know how the business is going to operate, and before you can really do some good planning. Basically, we had one plan, and that was to ship October 1st, and whatever it took to get there is what we had to do.
Right. So how did I'd like to talk a little about how the software got made. Were your programmers in-house, or were they freelance? How did you decide what platforms to go with? That sort of thing.
Sure. That was the developers were not in-house. They were out-of-house. We figured that we would be much better off finding talent that existed outside, because the really good talent probably did not want to come work for a startup like us. So that was a decision we made early on, that we would publish other people's software. And as I mentioned, that relationship with Tom Snyder was the one that really got us going. And Tom is just a tremendously intellectual, brilliant guy. His daughter, or he was a teacher actually at Shady Hill in Cambridge, and Jackie Morby, who was the partner at TA who actually got the funding for us, her son was at Shady Hill, and Tom was his teacher. And he had tremendous problems writing, just really tremendous problems writing. But when Tom put him down on a keyboard, all of a sudden, he was able to type. It's a different part of the brain. Mm-hmm. And so Jackie saw this and just said, "Wow, this really has tremendous application in the area of dyslexia and perhaps some other things like that, where if you can just find another part of the brain that works, all of a sudden wonderful things happen and creative writing occurs and all of that happened." And so she was really interested in Tom's work, and Tom, of course, had a real head for games, and just started writing for us and produced a whole bunch of different titles over time, and that was fantastic. On the hardware side, we just basically applied a lot of what we knew at BCG in terms of cost curves and production curves and things like that, and I think made some pretty good guesses about what the platforms were, but it wasn't tremendously difficult to do because it was pretty obvious month by month who was shipping how many units. And Atari was a fantastic base for us because it really, was fairly simple, fairly straightforward. Certainly, with cartridges, the issue for us was we suddenly had to deal with chip makers as well, and some of them weren't as reliable as others, and we did lose a whole Christmas season due to their inability to kind of ship key chips to Atari, and they shipped late on a particular machine that really did hurt us. But aside from that, they were just a great partner, and it was fun to go out and see how they dealt with growth. Their growth was just meteoric. A bunch of different executives, of course, we met over time, but that was really one of the fun parts of the business because we were all dreaming together and planning, just how do we actually make this industry robust and grow fast. And in our case, we were really interested in providing as much solid education as we could, sort of being there at the launch of the educational software piece of the business.
Sure.
And Atari was a great partner. They just they were all great partners. I mean, we went down. I know this isn't the part of your interview, but it was interesting when Commodore shipped the Commodore 64. We were all dying to find out what was in it because we needed a program. And I was, just through relationships, I just flew down to Pennsylvania, walked through their door unannounced, sat in the guy's office until he came and said, I really need your programming guide for this machine or you're not going to have any software for it. Mm-hmm. And he gave it to us and hopped on another plane, went back home and gave it to the programmers, and they gave it to the developers, and we were able to have very early products out on that machine. And, of course, that made a huge difference for us because we were able to ride their production curve, just as we were able to ride Atari's.
Nice.
The only real super disappointment was the IBM PC Junior, which, they, of course, withdrew from the market, but it was just a terrible machine, and they made all sorts of horrible compromises, and we were hoping that would be just yet another huge Atari, another huge Commodore addition to the volume. But the IBM line just really was didn't really work out. It was a big mistake, and but that was the only real disappointment. I think all in all, the hardware companies were great partners for us.
Awesome. So I could look at the sales stats and find out what the big sellers were, but I'm interested in what sticks in your mind as the software that made the company. Maybe something that was a surprise hit or something that sold for a long time. I don't know, just which of those soft programs sticks in your head?
Sure. Well, we always had the challenge to make a game that was solid education. And yet really make sure that it was fun and really make sure that it could be well implemented on a hardware platform that was available to us. Of course, that changed over the 10 years that the company existed. It got better and better, so the software could get better and better. But in the very, very early days, Snooper Troops 1 and Snooper Troops 2 were Tom Snyder's two products. And Tom was just had a fantastic game sense. The game was a lot of fun to play. It was educational. He was a teacher. He was an educator. So it was the best of both worlds. The gamer and the educator all sort of in the same brain. And so his products, and there were a number of others that came out after that. Every single one of them was a hit, and our audience loved them. The parents of the kids that play these products loved Tom Snyder games, and so he certainly was one of the most important success factors for Spinnaker. And he was also in a band, and so he and his band would come over and play at different Christmas parties and things like that. So we were just very, very close to Tom and to his company. I think Delta Drawing was also, that was a real solid educational product. There was no question about that. And as a result, that product did very, very well for us across all platforms. And I would say that was probably the most educationally oriented of all the products that we had, and was much more education than it was game. But it was fun. It was really fun to play, and that was of course a big success for us. Kids on Keys was another one, and then there were a number of math specific games. A woman named Joy Hankinson from San Francisco was a producer that worked. I think she did 5 or 6 games for us, and she was just a brilliant talent as well. So you kind of really identify the products by their developers, and there was a whole series of serious educational game developers that kind of came along with us. They saw us as a great way to get to market. We saw them as a great source of talent in educational gaming, and just really, became really close to them both professionally as well as very good friends with them.
Nice. So I saw some pictures, some adorable photos of you and your kids, and it said that every Friday your kids would come in and play test the software. I need to know all about that.
Well, it is kind of interesting. At that time I think I had JJ, Chris, Bobby, we had 6 kids, and we ended up with 9 children, and so those 6 kids ranged in age from probably 12 down to a newborn, and you saw the picture there. Mm-hmm. And what had happened was, it was the excitement of a startup. I just wasn't getting home until 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. David and Priscilla, the other 2 principals, they were married. The other 2 principals of the firm didn't have children, so they had no problem doing that. But my wife was getting a little sick of being alone with 6 kids, not being able to speak English to anybody. Right. And so all of a sudden one Friday at 6:30, she came through the door with beer and soda pop and lots of snacks and 6 children. And the 6 kids just, of course, we have a lot of computers. I think I had the 7th IBM computer that came into the city of Boston. I was on the wait list that long. And so they knew computers, and they came in and my gosh, there's an Atari, there's a Commodore, there's an IBM. They just had a blast playing, just getting on them and looking at the games. And of course, what it did was it shut down the office completely, and we all relaxed and we said, "Hey, this is pretty nice. Let's do this every Friday." and so that became, and it was, we'd invite the whole family to come in. It was important that it's a family event, not just an employee event. So, most of the people there were young and not married, but there were a number of people that were married, and it was fun for them to be able to bring their spouses in to get to know the other people at work as well as their kids. And then all of a sudden the developers realized that these kids were exactly the target audience for the products that they were developing, but they were 20-somethings and they really didn't know much about children and how they worked. So they as soon as they came through the door, they just grabbed the kids and sit them down at the computers and just kind of watch how they interacted with the games as they were being developed. And they discovered that, they assumed no one would ever hit the, P key up there in the corner. But, when little kids come in and they're banging on a keyboard, the P key gets hit a lot. So they say, "Oh, gosh, we can't use the P key for that." Just, little revelations like that were kind of fun for the team. And then David and I used that as an opportunity. Communication in a startup is so critical, and it's all so difficult to do because you're so busy. But you've got to do it. And we used that Friday session. He and I would sit down beforehand for 15 minutes, go through the highlights of the week, and then we would, just broadcast that to the entire company. We were all in one place here in Cambridge for a long time, but we eventually had people around the country, and so they would all phone in, and we'd do the communications update for the week, and that really, really helped. It sounds like a silly thing, but we hired really smart people, and they, could run with information, but if they didn't have it, they'd run in the wrong direction. So that enabled us all to get on the same page. People could ask questions, get them answered, and, just, be ready for a productive week the following week.
Nice.
One of the big things in that time, though, back in the 80s was, the technology really wasn't home-based. So when you went home, you really were at home, whereas now when you go home, you're not at all. So I think we were blessed, really, not having the distraction of always being developing, always being, doing what people do in startups now, which is working 24/7, and that's not a real healthy thing to do.
Right. Yeah. I saw that this article said Spinnaker pioneered big spending for advertising, $4 to $6 million in 1984, including advertising in Good Housekeeping, Better Homes and Gardens, and Newsweek. So really went outside of the usual realm of just advertising in computer magazines, which seems innovative, and I'm wondering if that felt like a scary gamble.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, we really, both of us, both David and I, love consumer marketing, and we had clients at BCG that were awfully good at it. And so, we knew the rules of thumb, we knew the ratios, we knew the costs, and it certainly was scary because it was a lot of money. But at the same time, we were pretty confident that the vehicles that we chose, Good Housekeeping and other places like that, would be good places to spend money. And it's really hard to go back and say, gosh, this was a great expenditure. This was a terrible expenditure. But by and large, the growth rate really did support that kind of spending, and it was not done by anybody else. So, and we were quickly followed. So I think others had looked at that and said, wow, they tried it. It must have worked. Not to say that they would just go and spend that kind of money without analyzing it, but there were a lot of followers, and it moved into those periodicals. And then a recession hit, and then all of a sudden, you stop doing that because there's no money to do that kind of spending anymore.
Sure.
But by and large, the software publishing business was a consumer marketing business, and the rules of that industry worked pretty well in software publishing as well. And David and I were pretty comfortable with all of that.
So, all right, let's get back to what are for the uninitiated, the rules of consumer marketing, and how is that different from what most marketing that computer companies were doing?
Well, I think, when you're talking about big expenditures in large circulation magazines, you have to have a distribution channel on the other end that matches that. So what most competitors were doing is only marketing through computer stores, and those were, relatively small volume bricks and mortar units. And what we were beginning to do then was really entertaining the thought of Target and Kmart and places like that. We had cut a deal with Fisher-Price so that we could actually label our software with a Fisher-Price label and produce games like that. And so we became, a much bigger publisher with much bigger distribution channels. And then we had an advertising budget to support the mass consumer magazines that actually, kind of sent their readers into those channels, into the large chains. And at that point in time, it was places like Kmart, as I mentioned, and Target. And so that piece worked out pretty well. The big downside of those large chain stores like that was simply that they were terrible in their assessment of what to order. So knowing that they could just shove this material back through the chain after Christmas, they just kind of irresponsible. So we'd have these huge orders, to ship to Kmart or ship to Target, and we'd fulfill the orders and break our backs getting them out. And then Christmas would come, the 4 weeks would come, and all those big retailers closed their books on January 31st. So they were in a rush to ship anything that didn't sell back to us. And those were the first time through that process was a difficult lesson, let me tell you.
Did you ever try to, maybe this wasn't your best interest, does a company try to dial back the number of orders that come in before Christmas and go, well, this sounds aggressive?
Exactly.
Yeah? Exactly.
Yeah, the first time through, nobody knew what they were doing, and no one knew what the demand would be. And once we kind of cleared up the mess with them, and our contracts didn't permit that. So all they were saying was sue us, and you realize pretty quickly that suing your best customers isn't a really smart thing to do. So we sat down with them. We just said, okay, let's figure out what we learned here. And we were able to put in algorithms then that helped us to determine much better ordering levels, shipping levels. And after that first year, I think things were, much calmer. But those distribution channels were absolutely critical to us because, they were so broad. And getting into that and doing it in the U.S. then gave us an opportunity to talk to the large retailers in France and in Germany and other places. And we were able to establish an international distribution channel using Hachette and Ravensburger and other large chains in all in Europe. We didn't go anywhere outside of Europe. But that was also a first. No one else had tried to market internationally. And it was a solid business, not an overwhelming business. It wasn't 50% of our volume like it is for many people today. It was probably 5% of our volume. But we learned a lot about marketing in Europe, and over the years made steady incremental progress in doing that. But it was fun to see all of those clamshell products, with German and French words all over them. And of course, we had to change the software as well, but all that worked out pretty well.
Cool. Was piracy a concern?
Well, of course, not with cartridges, which is one of the real beauties of it. And the segment that we were in, educational software for little kids, was not something that was on the top of the list of categories to be pirated. So we really never had to deal very much with that issue.
Good. Yeah, that was kind of my assumption. That's not the kind of thing that a teenage software cracker is going to go for,
Right.
And Delta drawing or
right. Yep. So that was not one of our problems. We had other problems, but not that one.
All right. What were the problems?
Well, I think that just learning about distribution was absolutely the biggest one.
Yeah.
Kind of maintaining really good relationships with software developers after they became really successful. Some of them got very demanding, and was not Tom Snyder. He was just a joy to work with from start to finish. But others, they had a success, and all of a sudden, they go get an agent, and then we were dealing with an agent, and sort of the friendships and the personal relationships we build up, suddenly weren't of any value, and we were just dealing purely in transactions, and that's never fun, and that was one of the disappointments, I guess. And then we had brand proliferation, that's for sure. I think we had 4 or 5 different brands of software aimed at different segments, and after I left the company, David and Priscilla really refocused it much more on really inexpensive business software, and that was brilliant. That worked out, really, really well for years. So that was kind of neat. That was one of the real lessons I took back from all of this, was that, the company went through ups and downs with the industry. I mean, I think we had a couple of recessions in the 10 years that the company was really active, and just understanding the incredible value of keeping a company alive. I mean, we had to do some significant layoffs in '87, and those aren't fun because you kind of, you sort of have this culture of a family company, and that works on the way up, but it doesn't work on the way down. Where you're saying, well, Johnny, we're short on money this month, you're not going to be able to eat. So that, it's not really a family. On the way down, it has to be a little bit more brutal, unfortunately. That was just kind of a frustration, I guess, was not really being able to keep everything cheery and upbeat all the time. That's just what happens in business oftentimes.
Right. You guys made it through the 1984 bust, though, and that's something, and just kept powered right on through that. And let's see, acquired, this might have been after you left, but acquired Springboard and the Newsroom and a bunch of other educational companies.
Yep. No, exactly.
Yeah.
I think we had a board that was a very, very solid board. I mean, the venture capital investors were mainline NEA and TA, and others were serious were serious venture capitalists, and the people they put on the board were phenomenal. Scott Sperling from Harvard Management was on the board, and he had been at BCG with us, and his insights were just fantastic. He and I didn't always agree, but boy, oh boy, he was a real talent, and it was nice to have him, have him batting for us. Nice. I think that was one of our real advantages, is that the quality of our board was just fantastic, and that wasn't the case for a lot of companies until later. Later when they were all venture capital backed, well, then they had that access to that kind of managerial or board talent, but we had it right from the start, and that was really, really helpful to us.
Did you get any feedback from parents, from educators, from? Oh,
sure.
Yeah.
Sure, we had a ton. As a matter of fact, it's yeah. Well, we encouraged that. We were very very interested in what they thought. So we had surveys that went out to to parents if we could locate them and receive their feedback. Of course, just being in Boston and being in this business, you'd run into people in the shopping center, and they just tell you how much the kids love the products. It went all the way to here. I'm now the dean of the business school here at Catholic University. On my first day of work here, a guy came in and he said, "Hey, I'm one of your faculty members. I used to order a ton of your software." And he just went on and on about how, for school, how great it was and how much it helped his kids really understand what the world of technology was, and through the appeal of the game, getting into more serious issues in math and in science and some of the brands that we had. So the feedback was very, very positive, and certainly what kept us going and kept us in the segment as long as we possibly could.
Nice. All right, so what changed? You're humming along, you're pumping out software, and I guess my question is, why did you leave? But maybe there was big fluctuations, but before then that should be talked about.
Yeah, I think the big thing was, I left in 1987, and in that year, again, there was just a real big slowdown. We were kind of getting used to that. That was year 5 of the company. But I think at that point in time, the investors, we needed another round of financing at that point. We had turned down a couple in the heydays, where things were really going well. We just didn't need the money. We were generating the cash that we needed. But then things turned around, and the board also was, the industry was much bigger. They had other choices. TA could go invest in Bruderbund, which had been around a while, obviously, but there were many more places for them to put their money. So they took a really hard line on us in terms of cram down financing, which means that, the common shareholders who don't participate in the new round are diluted pretty substantially. I forget what the ratio was for us, but it was a real dilution of the common shareholders. And the biggest common shareholders are always a manager, so that really hurts, David and me and the others who had options. And, it's a fact of life and financings. It's just the first time you go through it, it's just sort of a surprise and sort of ugly. But that, I'd kind of lost, a flavor for the business a little bit after that. And I think they probably, and there's no question that at that point in time, the idea of having two, we operated almost like co-CEOs, having two people in that slot was not something they wanted to continue to do, and that was a good decision just because of the cost structure of it. And they decided they wanted to go with David, and so I left the company at that point and went on to some other things.
Mm-hmm. And you stayed in educational software for a while, didn't you?
No, not really very long. Mm-hmm. Not very well. I went into, I'd made a lot of friends in the business, and we had used Regis McKenna's PR firm out on the West Coast, and Regis was just a great guy and a great friend. And so went to work for them in Boston, and that was all technology marketing and PR, but it wasn't all just educational. It was pretty broad. They had done the Mac, obviously, for Apple, and so they had lots of technology credibility, and they needed to build up an infrastructure in Boston, which I helped them do. And also worked for Johnson's Learning Corporation then, and that was in the educational software business. But that was, a different kind of business, client server, large educational systems, not consumer at all. That was sort of but it was fun. I love sales and I enjoyed sales a lot, and that was direct sales versus Spinnaker, which had been obviously channel sales. And but that enabled me to sell into large school systems, and that was a lot of fun to do, for a while. And then after that, I went into other businesses, childcare and things that sort of brought me into DC more often, and that's how I bumped into the people here.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Now you're the dean of the business school at Catholic University. Is that right?
Yes. So I'm right back into education.
Tell me all about that.
100%. Well, I had 9 kids. I'm a Catholic. After Enron fell, I was working for a company up in Boston, and got a call from a friend of mine who's a priest, and he said, people are taking these companies down. A lot of them are Catholic. A lot of them went to Harvard Business School like you did. What do you think the Catholic Church has to say about dishonest businesses? And I said, well, about businesses in general, I guess was a question. And I said, well, not much. I didn't really know very much about that, but it turns out there was quite a bit that the church really does talk about in its social doctrine. In terms of the social doctrine of the church, talks about with different principles, primarily around the dignity of the human person. And this whole idea that the dollar is the focus of everything is really different from the person being the focus of everything. So I studied some more and got really interested in that, and in my own businesses that I was involved in then. After Spinnaker, worked very hard to bring these principles into the business, and discovered that not only were they, the right thing to do, but they had a fantastic positive impact on the cost structure, primarily through increased productivity and reduction in turnover. And that was just a real eye-opener to me. I mean, bringing these operating procedures in that really recognized the value of each person in the business, the cost of doing that was just a fraction of the return that we got in terms of just better cost structure overall. So I got real interested in that, started giving a whole bunch of workshops around the West Coast, or East Coast rather, and bumped into some people here at Catholic University, and they've been following what I've been doing. I've been following what they've been doing, and they invited me to compete for the position down here as dean, and I did that, and just celebrated my first year anniversary.
Congratulations!
So we've got about 700 kids here in the undergraduate business school, and we're working with them just to really help them understand how to build a business. It's a very entrepreneurial-oriented school, and showing them, how do you build a business based on these principles, and it's just going awfully well and having an awful lot of fun.
Nice, cool.
Yeah, a real nice capstone, no question about it. I'm enjoying it a lot.
All right, I think I just have a couple more questions.
Sure.
So what haven't we talked about the Spinnaker days that we should have? What did we miss that you want to talk about?
I think, just for all of us who are in the business, the role of the trade shows was really, really important for a couple of reasons. One of the things that I just never had thought about before is that trade shows provide a deadline, and software developers need a deadline to finish the products. We needed a deadline to get everything done and get them, on the pallet and shrink wrapped and ready to ship. And those, big shows like the Consumer Electronics Show and other shows like that provided, 3 or 4 times a year, there was a real solid deadline that you just couldn't miss. And that was enormously beneficial to the functioning of, to a company, because it would get things done. You'd have to say no to a 100% solution and go with a 90% solution, and fix things up for version 2.0. But you just had to ship. You had to finish the work by the time of the trade show. Those trade shows were also instrumental in letting us see what else was going on, what other technologies were being used, what other platforms were being introduced. So it was just a great learning experience. If you're trying to understand how the industry is functioning, that's really where you saw it. And third, it was a great place to meet people and that you might hire and bring into your fold, and always an opportunity to negotiate with the trade for the following Christmas for shipment levels and price discounts and all of that. So I hadn't understood the incredible value of those trade shows until we went through them a couple times, and we participated in every one of them. It was just so valuable to us, and it was great to be able to bring 5 or 10 people out from the company, or 10 or 15 people out from the company, to kind of man the booth and learn about the business. And they just went back a lot smarter and a lot more effective for us after the show.
Cool. Nice. All right, so if you could send a message to the Atari computer users who listen to this podcast, and you can right now. Some of them were kids at the time playing with your software, and now they are grown-ups, still, playing with Ataris. What would you tell them?
Well, I'd first of all say that being able to work with Atari really helped make the company They were a big piece of our success. The people that we met there were so helpful and so wonderful. And that's one of the big takeaways, of course, of business, is that you realize that everything is in a relationship. And the relationship that we had with the executives at Atari was fantastic. And that helped us to be a better company. And perhaps we helped them to be a better company as well. I would say, just Atari was filled with entrepreneurs. Spinnaker was filled with entrepreneurs. And my message to young people always, to the students that we have here at Catholic University and to others, is, don't let opportunities just kind of pass you by. Take a look at each one. You're not going to invent a business around each one, but take a look at each opportunity and say, how could I create a business around this? And just going through that discipline, which is what David and I constantly did. Every now and then you say, hey, this is a pretty good opportunity, and here's how I create the business. And then boom, that may be the one or two times you launch off and start up your own company. And this nation so desperately needs startups right now. We used to be number 1 in startups. We're now number 12. And software is where it's happening. It's the best place in the world to start a business. The costs of starting a business in software because of the cloud have diminished by a factor of 10. So it's really a great industry. Software is a great industry. Hardware is a great industry. Hardware that's kind of defined by software, which is what Apple and Amazon and others do. It's just keep your eyes out and go start companies. That's my message.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bill. It's exactly what I needed.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Great to chat with you.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, there are 2 ways you can help. You can help fund these interviews directly by contributing to my Patreon. A small monthly contribution will help offset the expenses of making these oral history interviews. Contribute at patreon.com/Savitz. Or make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.